Thank you, Anuradha, for joining.
Thank you.
The author of today's book from Jammu and Kashmir, Kashmir Times. Kashmir Times had been an entry point for journalists whenever they wanted to understand the complexities of the state. For years, every journalist who had reached the state had stayed for a couple of days in Jammu, interacted with the Kashmiri Times team to understand the complexities and the difficulties which was unfolding there. The crucial decision of 2019 is defining and also deafening. In this atmosphere of deafening silence, Anuradha's book becomes a very, very important opening. And the book is poignant, book is insightful, and book is also a fine documentation. In a sense, book exemplifies what we expect of journalism. We have been told that journalism helps to navigate two tracks. One track witness, and the other track is making sense. In the sense, a dismantled state, this is Anuradha's book, does the two job very well. It at the same time bears witness, and it also helps us to make sense of the complex reality which has been unfolded in that city and in that state. From being a state, being reduced to two union territories has a much larger political significance. And Anuradha's book is just one aspect of her contribution to understanding. The first significant act was not a book, but a case filed in the Supreme Court when the internet was shut down in the state of Jammu, the 12th state of Jammu. Let's start with a case. Why did you think that it was important to talk about freedom of expression at the time when the political rights themselves were suspended?
Yeah, thank you, Paneer, for the introduction. And yes, it was absolutely important to talk about what was happening in Jammu and Kashmir, and even to understand what was happening. My journey to write this actually began a year after the changes had happened. And massive changes had taken place, and they were momentously impacting the lives of the people of the region. But within the region, there had been silence in the last 1 year, not just within the region, but even about the region. People writing about the region, those who were writing initially also had stopped writing. So I just, and even as journalists, we were not doing pretty much. We were unable to write too much. So I started unraveling these questions and, began jotting down things, thinking of maybe writing a series of articles. And then I discovered there was a bigger story, and a story because there is a larger way in that people are being impacted. New laws are being brought in. What do they mean for the people? How is it that people have been silenced? And what does it mean in the long term? So my attempt here to write the book is to break the silence, as you said, deafening silence. There was deafening silence. There continues to be a deafening silence, to break that silence and to bring humans central to that story.
Yes, you can continue.
Okay. So the book is primarily about Article 370 revocation, how it happened and how it had impacted the lives of people, and it continues to do so. There are 12 chapters in the book, and after the introduction, I actually, before I talk about the present, I talk about the past, and primarily the days and the year before the revocation. and how systemically ground was prepared for taking this action. Then I've also talked about the whole constitutional question of whether revocation of Article 370 was legal or not. What Article 370 really meant. It was linked to Jammu and Kashmir, and it was linked to its special status, but it was also a direct link between the Indian Constitution and Jammu and Kashmir. That was the constitutional recognition given to the accession that J&K's monarch signed with the Indian government, which was unique in its own way. It was different from the other accessions, and it spoke of the unsettled question of J&K. So whatever permanency that accession got was through Article 370. And while Article 370 had been hollowed out earlier, what remained of it was pretty much significant because it protected the distinct identities of the people. So it raised constitutional and legal questions of whether it can be taken away without involving the people of Jammu and Kashmir, or the elected, at least the elected representatives of Jammu and Kashmir, and which is why dozens of petitions are still pending in the court, and the court is and no hearings are really taking place there. So the idea was to not just understand the legal implications of Article 370 and whether question that's probably for legal experts to shine more light on this. But I have focused, much of my book is focused on how these changes were taking place. They by use of sheer force, by extra mobilization of military and military methods, by turning J&K into a vast prison with sweeping detentions, in which the entire top brass of India's, of Kashmir's pro-India leadership had also been detained. And other than that, random set of people had been picked up. And the government kept talking about, the government officials, while they did not give data on the arrests, they talked about these arrests as dynamic process, which meant that people were constantly being arrested, while some were being released. More kept being arrested, and there was a random sample of people, and people who belonged to different cross sections of society. There were businessmen, academics, lawyers, ordinary young youth, and then they were shifted to jails outside Jammu and Kashmir, and their families were not informed. The families were unable to meet them, and they were kept in shabby conditions inside jails before they were released. Some continue to languish in the jails even today. And at the same time, there was a prison outside the prisons. There was not just a lot of military presence and restrictions, there was curfew, there was internet restrictions. And in one of the chapters, I also wrote about the communication blockade, its impact on the ground, and my journey to the Supreme Court against the communication blockade. But it took about 5 months for the court to decide on something that was related to fundamental rights. Then, there is need to understand also how the kind of, the repression has always been there, existed in Kashmir. But what was a new way of repression and how it induced more fear? And this was interesting because the data on violence seemed smaller in comparison to the previous years in terms of psychological impact of the brutality exercised through a stringent lockdown, the massive scale and range of arrests, random attacks and raids, beatings, eerie ghost-like silence. And these are characteristics that are not often framed as extreme violence. This situation was unprecedented. It added to an extraordinary fear, an unfathomable despair, a sense of impotency, a sense that the miserable situation is permanent, and it was aimed at breaking the spirit of the ordinary people. What made the post August 5th situation different was that the measures purportedly taken to maintain law and order did not involve much physical violence, but they induced an immense sense of fear and sheer helplessness. Because, people were trapped in cycles of beatings, raids, detentions, and there was no escape, and they would be picked up on frivolous excuses. Their iCards, they would be made totally helpless, and made to feel that they had no control over their lives. Their iCards would be snatched. Punitive action would be taken against them for talking to media, and small children would be picked up. And then this seems to be true even as of today. So I also relied on the work of psychologists, who talk about how, continuous repression, but low-key repression can change, the anger of hope into anger of despair. By the time I started writing, there was already an overwhelming climate of fear. So my problem was that a lot of people were unwilling to talk. And so I had to rely on not just interviews, many of them on conditions of anonymity, but also the few news reports and fact-finding reports that were there in the public domain, and I had to pull these out. But means to an end, it led to political disenfranchisement, the state having been broken into 2 union territories and demoted, with no elections taking place. And the security situation, which is now worsening because of the kind of pushing, people have been pushed to the wall, and through sheer brutal force. And that is now creating a kind of a new phase of militancy, which is pretty much invisible. We don't have much knowledge about how, young people are picking up arms, but militants are, while the government is talking about militants are getting killed, and they are achieving major successes, they're not talking about how new young recruits are being, new boys are being recruited in militancy. And they're not talking about how militants are not targeting security forces as much as they are now targeting civilians. And many of these are targeted killings. Hindus are being selectively picked up, or laborers from outside the state. And these are all impacts of how Article 370 has happened. But the largest impact is the economic disempowerment. About more than 300 state laws were existing, and out of these, half of them were repealed and adapted. There's one law that allows now domiciles. It changes the terminology from permanent resident to domiciles in terms of this is the J&K Civil Services Recruitment Act, and which now allows people from outside to apply for jobs. These jobs were earlier the sole privileges of people who were permanent residents of Jammu and Kashmir. And domicile means anybody who could have resided there, lived there, or studied there. And there are, anything between a period of 2 to 10 years. And this, the locals feel that they would be marginalized and pushed to the corners. The most of the business investments in the last 3 years in the mining sector, in other sectors, have been done by outsiders, and the local businessmen are being pushed to the corner. A major impact is that is related to the land laws. There were about 12 acts related to land laws that were repealed and 14 others amended. And this has brought down the entire land ownership structure of Jammu and Kashmir, which was unique in nature. In one stroke, it has undone the many land reforms that, including those that gave land to the tiller and those that protected the farming lands. And new laws have been brought in, and new pretexts are being used to evict people from their homes, to demolish their homes. And this is happening even as we speak. In recent weeks, massive demolitions have taken place in Jammu and Kashmir. The government is saying that, certain residential colonies, that some of which were existing for decades, are built illegally on state land, but no due process is being followed. There are no eviction notices sent, just, government is sending in demolition squads to render people homeless in a big way. And this is extremely worrying, because when you snatch away all the democratic spaces, what you're left with is just a very violent articulation of what is happening. We've seen some stone pelting protests, and not in Kashmir Valley, but in Jammu over these demolitions. But we're hearing less and less about these kind of incidents in the media. The media has been silent, and the harsh. It has been silenced through very harsh and unannounced censorship, which exists and exercises itself through summons, through interrogations, sealing of newspaper offices, even detentions and arrests without bail. There have been attacks on the solidarity spaces, like Kashmir Press Club was shut down. There is a J&K Media Policy 2020, and which authorizes a bureaucrat to decide arbitrarily what is fake news and what is anti-national, and to even direct punitive action against journalists or news organizations that are deemed to be guilty of fake news or any word that is anti-national. And so since there's been a lot of silence, my attempt has been to break the silence and to bring out alternative voices that are in striking contrast with what the government is talking about. But there are many limitations, since this is about contemporary politics, and it primarily captures the 2 years after 2019. It took a long time for the book to be printed, and some of the things that were happening after I had written my first draft, that had to be condensed and brought in. But at best, I would say this book brings you just a small glimpse of what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir. And if it frightens you, if you read it, you need to understand that it's much worse out there. Yeah, thank you.
Books, one is struck by various sentences, but two sentences stand out. One sentence reads like this: fear cuts deeper than swords. The next sentence is, when truth is replaced by silence, then the silence is a lie. I would like you to first explore this sentence: fear cuts deeper than swords.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about. The kind of violence that happened post 2019. We've already had the Union Home Minister bragging about not a drop of blood was shed, and there was no stone pelting and all that. And while this was not entirely true, but the scale of violence was much, much less than Kashmir had witnessed in the past few years in terms of brutal, bloodshed or pellet injuries and killings. But I think that's a problem that we probably tend to associate violence with guns and swords and something that's much more visible, and not with ways of silently repressing a population, making them totally powerless. You can enter into their house. Home is said to be the safest space, I was told by one Kashmiri once, and I think I mentioned that in the book. And when they can just barge into your homes, they can raid homes, they can pick you up, detain you, they can take your phones, they can look through those phones, they can tamper with those phones, they can take your ID cards. You're just turned helpless. They can turn your house upside down. They can destroy your food supplies by mixing kerosene oil with rice. And these are the kind of daily incidents which turned people powerless, and they were repetitively happening. People being picked up, taken to jails, or detained for a while, for a few hours, for a few days, beaten up, intimidated, threatened, maybe just slapped, or maybe just kept there. And then they were released, and a new set of people would be picked up. So this is people are continuously trapped in that cycle. That had not happened earlier. And so fear cuts deeper than swords. And that really is not my line, but that's somebody's. Yeah. And the other, because I begin with quotes, which are known quotes, and well, the silence is a lie. When you replace, and this is largely related to the media, which has been silent. And some are talking about, there are newspapers that are still coming out, and they're not saying anything. And what they're actually saying is, initially they stopped criticizing the government, or criticizing the policies, or writing about the truth. What is the ground situation in the valley? Have people been detained? Where they didn't even write about the political leadership that was detained even that wasn't being reported much. Or about other people, or about how people are going about their daily lives, or even through those lockdown years, whether they faced any health issues. People didn't have access to health. There were no phones, there was no internet, not even the basic landline phones that they could call for an ambulance. So these kind of issues, I mean, they were not being reported. So when there was absolute silence on what people are going through, and the only voice is about what the government is saying and what their achievements are. I mean, recently I saw this, the front page, while these demolitions are going, and it's interesting, there's a front page in one newspaper. Its main lead is, the government says, we are going to build these many some thousand houses by 2024 or 2025. And the news of the demolitions happening, where tens and hundreds of people on a daily basis are being rendered homeless, that has been squeezed to some bottom corner. So, I mean, you can see how silence becomes a lie.
See, one silence which is really worrying is the silence of our courts. How do you look at the silence of the courts? Let's start with your own case when you went and asked about the internet shutdown. Why did it
Mhm.
take such a long time for that case to come to wherever it managed to reach finally?
I mean, it is worrying. It is extremely worrying. I mean, look at the Article 370 petitions, how they are pending in the courts. And I think there was a joke going around with Tarigami, who had petitioned who was one of the petitioners, and then he sent in another petition that why these guys are not being heard, and that was also, that's also kept pending. um, so the joke was that, you need to file another petition for that to move through. I think any controversial petition today, and especially if it is related to Kashmir, it would be postponed for till eternity. But any controversial petition today is not really being heard by the courts in India. And if you look at courts in Kashmir, I think things have been much worse. Um, uh, the hearings just don't take place in terms of in cases of bails, in cases of I mean, even in our own case, where our office was sealed in October 2020, and we've gone to court and no hearing has taken place. So
This is
it's
the
really
case of
worrying, because these are the judiciary adds a layer of accountability in governance, and it's very important in democracy. And all these, I think all layers that the government is kind of dismantling one by one. And it's not just dismantling in Kashmir, I think dismantling everywhere across India. You've rendered, even your legislature, there's a contempt for the way the opposition speaks. You don't allow them to speak. The judiciary, and the judiciary is a main hope. Media is a main hope again, which is the fourth pillar of democracy. All these pillars are being kind of dismantled.
the key question is, I say anybody else other than you documented this suffering of post 2019?
I hope they have. I think, but there's so much of fear, and particularly for any Kashmiri Muslim to do what I am doing, I think it's much more difficult, because they're constantly being subjected to, very terrorizing ways, summons, raids. I know of very good journalists who could have done a wonderful job right now, and they are today silent, and they're silent because they have been compelled, they have been intimidated so much that they are today silent. Or there are journalists who are in jails. I'm sure they could have done a great job. And these were some of them are very fine journalists who have great sources, people who have helped me sometimes in getting some feedback in certain areas wherever. I feel they could have done a great job, and I hope they are somewhere doing this secretly, so that sometimes we need that documentation on Kashmir, what is happening on Kashmir. We need more of it.
See, one of the aspects we as journalists anticipated is a larger solidarity. Unfortunately, we won't see that larger solidarity happening because what is happening is not getting recorded in various Indian languages. I can speak with certain amount of authority about Tamil language because not much has been written about what happened after 2019. If it is the case of Tamil, it's also true of other South Indian languages. This lack of solidarity is partly institutionalized, but partly there's also lack of empathy, which is now gaining currency in not only in judiciary, but also in media. How do you look at this growing lack of empathy?
It's a reflection of society also. It's building up a society like that at the same time. How do I see? There's always been a certain lack of empathy in media, in judiciary, with when it comes to Kashmir. There always was. Because they view Kashmir from a different lens. They view Kashmir as a place where, people cannot be trusted. There has been a relationship of mistrust between New Delhi and Kashmir uh, forever. And that's what has guided the politics there. I think somewhere that is responsible. But in a climate, in the present government, one, the way they present it, it's a majoritarian government. One, they have created a very a climate within India that is so divisive and polarized today. And within that atmosphere, they projected Kashmir's Article 370 revocation as some kind of a victory, as some way of that they had conquered the territory and not its people. And it was done in a way, and when you're talking about the territory and we've done it and we've conquered it and the people don't exist in that imagination, and the only way that people exist in that imagination are that the people have been subdued and the people have been showed their place. And that was how a majoritarian mindset was thinking within the country. And unfortunately, I think media today, a large section of the media today subscribes to that kind of a worldview, or is doing so for whatever benefits that they are getting. They would know better. And which is why you don't see that kind of empathy. You rather see more a vilification of Kashmiri in the media, particularly. And then, yeah, I think if the media would have behaved differently, if the media could, look at Kashmir with an open mind, go there, see what the people are doing, what the people are saying, what the people are not saying. I mean, recently, you might not have seen that in the Wire. Arfa Khanum has done a series of stories, and these are in Hindi, so probably you might not be able to see, but these are, I wish they would, add some subtitles to that for others to see. Because through videos, she's shown how people are reluctant to talk, and how there is a certain silence, how there's a abnormality within the valley. But these are the kind of stories that we need.
See, one aspect which has not been documented is an Hindu government, a majoritarian government, brought in a major change. And that change is not helpful for the Pandits. Pandits are suffering as much as anybody else in the
Right.
composite Jammu and Kashmir. Why is that suffering itself is not getting documented?
Yes, that suffering is not getting documented, and even in fact, even within my book, because what was happening to Kashmiri Pandits in the last 2 years, the killings started in 2021. And I was only able to bring more sketchy details within, because by then my first draft was over and I couldn't do it. But I tried my best to bring that. Well, yes, this is not being done for rest of India. You'll see, last year we had that film that was being celebrated, which brought in the Kashmir Files, that in the name of talking about sufferings of Kashmiri Pandits, it actually peddled a lot of lies about Kashmiri Muslims. And those are the lies that became popular. And in fact, at the same time that Kashmiri Pandits within the valley were suffering. They were suffering because there was a new sense of fear in the way that Kashmiri Pandits, some of the Kashmiri Pandits were targeted by militants in 2021. And these have not been talked about because these are directly linked to the changes that have taken place after 370. These are directly linked to the Hindutva narrative of the government, and I think the media would not want to talk about it because it would reflect poorly on the government that has celebrated the victory and conquest of Kashmir.
See, one issue where we are not really able to understand its full import is the new delimitation exercise which has been carried out. Could you explain what is happening with the new delimitation exercise?
The new delimitation exercise, that report has already been presented before. It's already complete and formalized. And one, it's I think worrying for rest of India also, as because once you set a precedent like this, it can be replicated elsewhere. One, it was done out of turn. There was a freeze on delimitation for till 2026. So why is it that J&K was singled out? There is an attempt through the Delimitation Commission to create more Hindu majority constituencies within J&K. Now Kashmir is totally Muslim majority, but there's an attempt to then create these divisions between the ethnic divisions, the Gujjar and the Pahari divide in certain areas, the Gujjar and the Kashmiri divide in certain areas. And it has there's a brutal gerrymandering of boundaries without taking into fact, basic considerations like population, geographical access, which are the guiding principles. Instead of that, there's a massive, like there are areas within certain constituencies. There is one district, and there would be one particular tehsil within that area, which has no geographical congruity with the constituency it has been pushed into. It's surrounded by another constituency. So what is the ease of access for the people of that area? The only ease is for the BJP, because this was a Muslim majority, and they wanted to push them into another constituency to create more Hindu majority constituencies. And the worst is the case of the parliamentary constituency. And if anybody familiar with the territory of Jammu and Kashmir and the culture of Jammu and Kashmir, there is Rajouri Poonch, and these are sensitive border districts. They were part of the Jammu. Poonch was a parliamentary constituency. Now Jammu would be a separate parliamentary constituency. But Rajouri and Poonch, since they have a certain sizable Hindu population, they also have lots of Gujars. So that has been added to South Kashmir constituency, Anantnag constituency. And these two are in two different regions. Anantnag is in Kashmir Valley, Rajouri Poonch are in Jammu region. Ethnically, culturally, they are very different regions. And there is no geographical link either. They are linked only through the Mughal Road, which is shut for 5 months in a year. The people on both sides do not speak the same language. And the nearest town that connects this Rajouri Poonch area to Kashmir Valley is Shopian. But you'll go through Shopian now, but Shopian is not part of this constituency. But you have to cross Shopian and reach Anantnag And Anantnag is part of this constituency. So it's absolutely senseless and brutal the way it has been done. It defies any logic. It makes things more inconvenient for people. The only convenience is to create majority for BJP, and they're still not very confident about it, which is why they're not going ahead with elections. There's massive anger within Jammu and Kashmir against the government. It's building up. And even in the Hindu majority areas, there's massive disappointment. Even in Ladakh, which celebrated initially the abrogation of Article 370 and the Union Territory status, there are massive protests now there.
Given the amount of resistance which is happening, what is the way to amplify this resistance? What is the way to understand the aspirations of the people, for the people who are living outside Jammu and Kashmir?
I think resistance right now is happening more in Ladakh in a very organized way, and then the people are united, the people are talking about it, and politicians, civil society, they're all working in tandem, and there's a systemic way of protesting and resistance. Resistance in rest of Jammu and Kashmir is pretty much silent, and is silent because of fear, mostly because of fear in Kashmir Valley, in Muslim majority areas of Jammu region. In Hindu majority Jammu region, there is both fear and that dilemma that, politically they are more aligned with the BJP ideology right now. So but to understand that silence, I think media from outside, they need to visit Jammu and Kashmir more. They need to spend more time. They need to dig out stories. They need to have open-ended conversations with people, and try and bring out what are these fears. Try and understand what are these fears. Why is there a silence? Why are people not talking? I mean, Kashmir was a place where people would randomly talk politics on the roads. People had a political view of everything, and they would speak their minds. Today, if you ask them, there is absolute silence and they don't want to talk about it. And so these are...
See, how do people look at zero representation in something like Rajya Sabha? Now it is nearly 2 years where you have moved to, after Ghulam Nabi Azad's term came to an end. There's no representation in Rajya Sabha, and there are no institutional mechanism through which Jammu and Kashmir can send somebody to Rajya Sabha. How do people look at this lack of representation?
People within Jammu and Kashmir, I think they're more, not just Rajya Sabha and the parliament, more than that, the local representation matters, the local representatives, the assembly, an empowered assembly, which has, and that, because that's more important for them for their day-to-day matters. Their issues related to basic roads, development, and health issues, education, whatever. I think that is probably being more missed.
Do you think there's going to be some form of an institutional arrangement coming in near future, or it is going to happen only after 2024 elections to the government of India?
No, sorry, I didn't get that.
Do you think there is a possibility of some sort of institutional changes happening before 2024 general elections to our Lok Sabha?
No, I don't think so. I can't say, it's just too speculative. What the BJP has its own very different way of functioning. and its focus is entirely on what will yield its political benefits. If at all for 2024 elections, they have nothing to sell on the report card. The only thing they have is, oh, we conquered Kashmir, and we showed their local Muslim population their place. And that's the only thing that they're likely to sell. If in that, if it suits them, they will make whatever institutional change they have to make. If it doesn't, they might not.
I think we'll open the floor for few questions.
Yeah.
Any questions, please? Uh-huh. Oh, chat is bit problematic. See, one of the questions which keep repeating is post 2019, the resistance is not visible. Hence, this idea of negotiation itself is a major concession given by Delhi. How do you look at this new narrative which is gaining ground?
That negotiation is, sorry?
Itself is a major concession given to the, and they say that this abrogation of Article 370 is a first step towards equality.
Yeah. How do I see it? It's taken away on the ground. It's taken away even the existing democratic rights of the people. Democracy in Jammu and Kashmir was already, in breach, observed in breach in the last several decades. And now even the existing democratic rights, civil rights, they have been taken away. The other thing is, I mean, when you do this whole narrative of equality, some of the laws in Jammu and Kashmir were exemplary and they could have been replicated outside in rest of India for better equality, because the land reforms that happened in Jammu and Kashmir were landmark. The debt waivers that happened empowered the poor people, the poor peasantry, the Dalits primarily. And we did not have homelessness in Jammu and Kashmir. We never had. That was never an issue. We didn't have, though poverty existed, but we did not hear of things like hunger. Untouchability was not as stark as rest of India. And these were because Jammu and Kashmir had a different constitution and had brought in several different laws. Our development indices were better than many other parts of India. And I think this whole narrative of equality is flawed. India is a democracy. It's asymmetrical, it's a challenge and onslaught on its asymmetric federalism, of which Kashmir was a centerpiece. But this whole imposed equality narrative threatens Indian democracy and Indian federalism also. And I think it's extremely problematic for that.
Dealing with Kashmir is generally used as a proxy for its failure with dealing with its neighboring countries, especially with Pakistan. And how do you look at the failure of foreign policy and its failure of domestic policy? Because what happened right now in Kashmir is a simultaneous failure of both the fronts.
Yeah.
How do you look at this simultaneous failure on two fronts?
On the domestic policy and the external policy, and they're pretty much interlinked, One, you have on the Western front, you have Pakistan. On the Northern front, you have China, and they're not very great relations with either of the two countries, and particularly not with Pakistan. But at the same time, Pakistan and China, there is a certain interoperability between the two countries. And that's not the only thing worrying. Uh, but what is happening in, I mean, globally, of course, you'll have to go much deeper into probably the whole global politics. I don't want to go into right now. And but what is happening internally, the kind of changes that took place, Jammu and Kashmir was a state which Pakistan saw as contested, and which it had been a bone of contention between India and Pakistan for many years, and India and Pakistan have fought wars over that. It was a part of Jammu and Kashmir is under Chinese control, and though China has never really made much bones about that, but when Article 370 was removed, it gave an excuse to China, which was probably looking for one, to enter into Galwan Valley. And it's also frightening because when you turn, you have this area which is a sensitive area. This is a sensitive border area. This entire territory is sensitive. And when you make its politics even more complex, when you make the region more fragile, when you turn the entire population that you have repressed hostile, I mean, this whole combination of the domestic strife within and what happens on the borders or the external front is can have frightening repercussions.
See, one aspect which is not getting fully recorded is the people's aspirations, which are getting trampled upon on a regular basis. If people's aspirations are getting trampled upon, it moves to something called, which we saw it even in Jaffna a few years ago, where people's desire is to live rather than exist. They try to look at their day-to-day existence rather than looking at life in a larger sense of the term. This reduction of people's life to look at day-to-day existence rather than looking beyond, where you actually suck out the idea of aspiration. What is that is doing to the society?
It's completely demoralizing the society. It is impacting people psychologically. If you look at people's faces, I mean, you've never seen. They're just sad faces. They're sad faces. They're sad eyes, and they're no words. And all they talk about, if you talk to them, yes, they're only talking about today. Their struggle is for survival, just for existence, just bare existence. And just to do that is resistance itself. And that's the only resistance that and I think it's terrifying for any society. It's not just demoralizing them, it's pushing them to the brink. And I fear that if this continues for a long time, there may be a response, and the response might be frighteningly violent. Instead of being creative, instead of being more democratic, instead of being articulated through voices, through different kinds of mediums, it destroys a society, it demoralizes a society, dehumanizes a society.
Sorry to hear that, but we'll just take one question and then. Yes, Ranjit, you may ask.
Hello.
Can you hear him?
Hello,
No.
ma'am. Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your views, ma'am. I just have one question. In this situation where this forced silence is rendered as acceptance, where is the hope for the people to resist?
I don't know. Right now, it's very speculative to say where does the hope for resistance exist. I'm looking at the history of Kashmir. Kashmiris are very resilient people, and there are some people who say, "Oh, they're waiting for the right time to come out." Um, I can't say whether that is true or not true. But what was interesting was when, recently Rahul Gandhi's march that went into India, and not that people in Kashmir are pro-Congress, I have no means to find out whether they really are. But the way Rahul Gandhi's march had captured the imagination of the people as he walked northwards. And but nobody expected a large number of people to come out in Kashmir and stand with him. People feel even more distance from India today, the kind of life that they have been subjected to. But to have come out and, it seemed to have the way that he was moving out, he's moving out on the roads, people are connecting with him. And Kashmiris did come out and connected with that march. Because it gave them confidence to come out finally and give voice and expression to what they were feeling. They mostly talked about jobs and issues of day-to-day life. But to even do that hadn't happened in 3 years. And I think that gave me a little, probably made me wonder whether they were really waiting for the right time to come out and say what they have to say, and they're building their strength. So that gives me hope. And the other thing that gives me hope is that I'm a student of history. And these kind of authoritarian forces never last forever. They cannot sustain. They fall under their own weight and they will crumble. It'll take a little time.
Thank you, ma'am.
We'll take one more question.
What about local leaders, Kashmiri leaders, Abdullahs and others? What is their view on this? How they want to take it up? They are also silent?
They are also mostly silent. I mean, they're not speaking as forcefully as they were. They are not, I mean, many of them are facing different ED cases and income tax cases and all that. They're being intimidated through these different corruption cases. Not that they shouldn't be, politicians across India have been accused of corruption in the past and continue to be. And but what has happened is that they are unable to organize themselves at the grassroots level. They have no connect. They have lesser connect with the people at the grassroots. And because they're within Kashmir, they feel that some people would see them as pro-India, some people, and within India, they're seen as anti-India. And that's the kind of dilemma that they're dealing with. So many of them, even when they want to go out, they are put under house arrest. Mehbooba has tried several times to come out and protest on behalf of the people or go and meet victims where they have been killed or have been harmed in whatever way. And she has been stopped and put under house arrest. So A, they're not being allowed also. 2, they're being intimidated. And 3, I think their political base is also shrinking. So these were the most powerful people in Kashmir, and they're much more powerless today.
See, there is one question from our online participant. His question is, do you think there is a renewed push for natural resources in Jammu and Kashmir now? And he talks about the instance of finding lithium in J&K.
I'm not sure if this is, yeah, I did read about this lithium findings, but I think lithium is not a new discovery. I'm not sure. And since I don't have any authentic information, it would be difficult for me to say anything about that. J&K is rich in natural resources and minerals. I really cannot say. This is like, I mean, and BJP is very adept at doing that. It takes up old policies of different governments and gives it a new name and goes ahead with the inauguration of something that has been existing for years. Is it a case of that? I really don't know.
Thank you very much for getting up so early in the
Thank
morning
you.
and joining us. Thank you, Ria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.